"Marry me tonight." Those 3 words fell from the lips of the most dangerous man in South Korea, and the night went completely still. The fountain hummed. Seoul glittered beyond the garden walls like a city made of shattered diamonds. And Amanda Obi stood there, barefoot on cold stone, staring at a man whose hands were trembling for the first time in his entire life. This was the man that entire governments feared. The man that made billionaires sweat simply by entering a room. The man who had looked through every woman who ever stood before him, as though they were made of glass until tonight. But what nobody knew, what nobody could possibly understand yet, was why this moment was so much more devastating than it looked. Because this was not just a man asking a woman to marry him. This was a fortress, built over 6 years of blood and silence and unimaginable pain. Finally, completely, catastrophically cracking open. And the question burning right now is not whether she said yes. The question is what on earth happened between a ruthless mafia boss forbidden to love and a young woman from Lagos, to bring the most untouchable man in South Korea to his knees in a hotel garden at midnight. If you are new here, welcome. You are exactly where you need to be. Hit that subscribe button right now and tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight. Because this story, this one right here, is going to make you feel something you were not prepared for. Now let's go back to the very beginning, because what happened before that garden will change everything you think you know about this night. His name was Baek Tae-young, 29 years old, and the name in Korean meant son, which was perhaps the most devastating irony anyone who actually knew him could imagine. Because there was nothing warm about Baek Tae-young, nothing bright, nothing that invited you closer or made you feel safe in his presence. He was the kind of cold that did not announce itself. The kind that simply settled into a room and stayed there, quiet, permanent, and absolute. He was the founder and shadow CEO of the Taesung Group, a luxury conglomerate so polished on the surface that politicians attended its charity galas and business journalists wrote flattering profiles about its philanthropic work. But underneath that gleaming surface lived something else entirely. The Taesung Underground Syndicate had its fingers embedded so deeply into Seoul's financial and political infrastructure that removing it would not just hurt the city. It would make the city bleed in ways that could not be explained to the public. Men who crossed Taeyong did not get second opportunities. Deals that fell through his hands did not fall anywhere good. And the few people who had ever attempted to challenge his authority directly had each, in their own particular way, quietly ceased to be problems. Nobody asked how. Nobody wanted to know. He moved through Seoul like a shadow that had learned to wear a suit. 3 black vehicles. 6 men. Eyes that processed every room in under 4 seconds and found the exits before they found the people. He accepted water at events and declined everything else. He shook hands without warmth and made eye contact without welcome. And he had mastered, with the kind of precision that only comes from years of deliberate practice, the specific art of looking at a person without seeing them at all. But here is what nobody at those galas knew. Here is what none of those business journalists ever discovered. Here is the thing that Elder Choi, the man who shaped Taeyang's empire with iron hands and colder wisdom, had buried so effectively that even Taeyong himself rarely allowed it to surface anymore. 5 years earlier, Baek Tae-young had loved someone. Not cautiously, not strategically, not the way a careful man loves, with one eye always watching the door. He loved her the way a person loves when they are young enough to believe that loving completely is not the same as being reckless. He loved her with everything he had not yet learned to protect. Her name was Han Suyeon, and she was placed in his path with surgical, patient, devastating precision by people who had studied Baek Tae-young long enough to know exactly what kind of woman would reach the part of him that armor could not cover. She spent 8 months learning him. Every secret he carried below the surface. Every wound he had never shown anyone. Every dream he only admitted in the dark. She listened like someone who genuinely cared. She stayed like someone who genuinely meant to. And Taeyong, brilliant, formidable, dangerous Taeyong, believed every single second of it. Then one night she was gone. And what she left behind was not just the wreckage of his heart. She extracted the financial access codes to 3 of his most sensitive accounts. She handed the identity of his most carefully protected informant to the enemies who had sent her. A man with a wife, 2 daughters, and 17 years of loyal devoted service to the Taesung Empire. That man was dead within 48 hours. Taeyong sat in his office for 3 days and did not speak, did not eat, did not sleep in any way that resembled actual rest. The people closest to him moved around those 3 days like they were moving around something that might detonate without warning. And when he finally emerged on the 4th morning, showered, dressed, completely composed, something fundamental had changed. The warmth that had existed in him, that quiet, particular warmth that his mother Baek Soo-jin had spent years nurturing and protecting, was simply gone. Not suppressed, not hidden, not waiting underneath something, gone. And in its place Elder Choi installed a rule, spoken quietly in a dark room on the worst night of Taeyang's young life. 5 words that became the iron architecture of everything that followed. You will not love again. Not a suggestion. A law, written in the specific ink of a man who had just watched betrayal nearly destroy an empire that took a generation to build. And Taeyong, grieving, furious, and more frightened than he had ever been in his life, agreed to it with the absolute conviction of someone who believed they were agreeing to something that would keep them safe. He did not understand yet what he was actually agreeing to. His mother understood. Baek Soo-jin, graceful, perceptive, quietly formidable, watched her son seal himself shut from the inside and felt something break in her chest that never fully healed. She tried. Carefully and consistently and without ever losing hope she tried. She introduced women from families she trusted, arranged quiet dinners, created opportunities with the patient precision of a woman who loved her son more than her son loved himself. A Chaebol heiress pursued Taeyong for 8 relentless months. Beautiful, accomplished, genuinely warm. He was courteous for exactly 1 evening and unreachable every day thereafter. She gave up exhausted and confused. A cardiac surgeon his mother genuinely adored. Funny, he looked at his hands for a long moment. I don't know how anymore, Iyama, he said quietly. I think that part of me is just gone. Baek Soo-jin reached across the table, covered his hands with hers, and looked at her son, this brilliant, powerful, profoundly broken man, with the specific certainty of a mother who knows something her child does not yet know about himself. It is not gone, she said. It is waiting. And when it finds what it has been waiting for, nothing in this world will be able to stop it. He kissed her forehead, went home to his empty penthouse. He did not believe her. But here is the thing about mothers who love deeply and see clearly. They are almost never wrong. Amanda Obi had been in Seoul for 14 months before the night that changed everything. 22 years old, master's student at Yonsei University on a full academic scholarship that she had earned with the kind of focused, relentless brilliance that does not announce itself loudly but simply produces results that cannot be ignored. She was from Lagos, Nigeria, and she carried Lagos with her everywhere she went. Not as nostalgia, not as homesickness, but as foundation, as the specific, unshakable ground beneath everything she was. Her mother Grace Obi had raised her alone in a small house in Lagos on a seamstress income and an absolute refusal to raise a daughter who did not know her own worth. Grace worked 12-hour days without complaint. She sang while she worked without knowing she was singing. She fed Amanda on jollof rice and on 3 principles that became so deeply embedded in her daughter that they were indistinguishable from personality. Be kind without being weak. Be confident without being cruel. And know your value so completely that no person and no circumstance, no matter how powerful, no matter how overwhelming, can ever make you forget it for even a single moment. Amanda absorbed all 3 the way roots absorb water. Quietly, completely, permanently. She arrived in Seoul with 2 suitcases and her grandmother's gold bracelet on her left wrist, and her mother's voice sitting in her chest like a compass that worked in every language. Seoul received her the way great cities receive people who arrive with open eyes, with overwhelming complexity and occasional loneliness and sudden breathtaking beauty appearing without warning in the most ordinary places. She found a small apartment in Mapogu. She learned enough Korean in 3 months to navigate daily life. Not perfectly but enthusiastically, which endeared her to the Halmiani at the Pojangmaka near her university who gave her extra tekbaki every single time. She tutored undergraduates 3 evenings a week. She called her mother every Sunday morning without a single exception. She built something real and quiet and genuinely hers in a city that did not know her name. She also had something that Seoul, for all its sophistication and glitter and carefully performed excellence, encountered very rarely. She had presence. Not the performed kind. Not the kind that announces itself and demands acknowledgement. The kind that simply exists so fully and so genuinely that everything artificial in the surrounding environment becomes suddenly, uncomfortably visible by comparison. The kind of presence that makes a room feel different without doing anything to make it feel different. She was not looking for Baek Taeyong. She was not looking for a mafia boss or a powerful man or a love story or an adventure. She was 22 years old and building a life with careful hands, and she arrived at the Lotte Hotel Seoul Annual International Business Elite Gala simply as herself, because her faculty dean Professor Lim Hyung-soo had looked at her across a seminar table 3 weeks earlier and said with quiet conviction, "You belong in rooms where decisions are made. Consider this your introduction." She wore a deep wine-colored dress she had spent 3 weeks saving for, her grandmother's bracelet, her mother's small pearl earrings, and that quality of presence that required absolutely no accessories and that would, within 3 hours of walking through those ballroom doors, do something to the most emotionally fortified man in South Korea that 6 years of iron discipline had failed to prevent. She had absolutely no idea. The Lotte Hotel Seoul on a Thursday in October was precisely the kind of environment that reminded you exactly how much power looked like when it dressed itself up for an evening. 500 of the most influential names in Korean business, politics and culture filled the 32nd floor ballroom. Crystal chandeliers throwing light across imported flowers. A string quartet performing in the corner with the discreet excellence of people who understood their purpose was atmosphere rather than attention. Women in gowns that cost more than most people's annual salary moving through conversations that shaped the country's next quarter. And then the energy shifted. Not dramatically, not with any single obvious signal. Just shifted. The way a room shifts when something genuinely dangerous enters it. Conversations dropped half a volume. Backs straightened almost imperceptibly. Eyes moved with careful, calculated awareness toward the entrance. Baek Taeyong walked in at 9:15. 3 vehicles outside. 6 men flanking the perimeter. And Taeyong himself moving through the crowd like water moves through a space. Finding every gap, touching every surface, controlled and quiet and absolutely inevitable. Black suit that looked like it had been constructed specifically for his body by someone who understood that clothing on a man like this was not decoration but statement. His father's watch on his left wrist. Dark eyes conducting a comprehensive assessment of the room in under 4 seconds. He moved through the crowd conducting the invisible business that events like these existed to facilitate. 30 seconds with a government minister. A look exchanged across the room with a banking executive that communicated an entire negotiation without a single word. A brief, controlled smile deployed in the direction of a foreign diplomat that meant nothing emotionally and everything strategically. His most trusted man Kang Do-won moved 3 precise steps behind him. In 9 years of service, Do-won had developed an almost supernatural ability to read Taeyang's silences and movements and the specific quality of his attention. He knew every version of his employer's stillness. The controlled stillness of a man conducting business. The dangerous stillness of a man making a decision. The cold stillness of a man who had already decided and was simply waiting for the appropriate moment. So when Taeyong stopped moving, not dramatically, not obviously, but with a particular quality of arrested attention that Do-won had genuinely never witnessed before in 9 years, Do-won noticed it immediately. He followed his employer's gaze across the ballroom. Near the far window, a young woman, wine-colored dress, long braids, standing completely alone, not nervously, not self-consciously, but with the kind of easy, unperformed self-possession that made everything around her look slightly theatrical by comparison. She was looking at Seoul's nightscape through the floor-to-ceiling glass with the unhurried contentment of someone who found the view genuinely interesting and needed no one's permission to find it so. 3 men approached her over the next 20 minutes. Do-won watched all 3. Each one left looking pleasantly bewildered. Not rejected cruelly, not dismissed coldly, but somehow gracefully redirected by a woman who was so settled in herself that the usual strategies simply did not find anything to grip onto. Taeyong watched all 3 as well. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he set down his glass of water with a quietness that somehow carried more weight than if he had set it down hard. Do-won. Sir. The woman near the window. Wine dress. Do-won reached Amanda at the window. He stood beside her and spoke quietly and with complete professional discretion. Good evening. I apologize for the interruption. My employer Mr. Baek Taeyong would like to invite you to join him at his table. He would be very pleased if you would accompany me. Amanda turned from the window. She looked at Do-won directly, looked at his face, looked at his suit, looked back at his face. She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she smiled. Mr. Baek Taeyong, she said pleasantly. I see. Yes, Do-won said. He would very much like to meet you. Amanda tilted her head slightly. That is very kind of him, she said. Please tell Mr. Baek that I appreciate the invitation genuinely, and that he sounds like a very interesting person. Do-won waited. However, Amanda continued, still warm, still completely composed, not a single edge in her voice. Where I come from, a man who is truly interested in meeting someone comes and introduces himself. That is simply how things are done. She held Do-won's gaze steadily. If Mr. Baek would like to meet me, he is very welcome to come and do so. I will be right here. She turned back to the window. Do-won stood for one silent moment. Then he nodded once. A small precise nod. Turned and walked back across the ballroom. Do-won returned to Taeyong. Delivered the message word for word. The 3 men within earshot went completely still. Baek Taeyong stood without expression for 10 full seconds. In 9 years, Kang Do-won had developed an extremely precise ability to read his employer's silences. This one was different from every previous silence he had catalogued. It was not the cold silence of controlled anger. It was not the flat silence of boredom. It was the stunned silence of a man who had just experienced something completely outside his existing categories. Then, so briefly that Do-won would later question whether he had imagined it, the corner of Taeyang's mouth moved. He straightened his jacket, and Baek Taeyong, who had not crossed a room for anyone in 6 years, walked the full length of the ballroom to introduce himself to a 22-year-old student from Lagos who had sent back his invitation with better directions. Nobody in that ballroom had ever seen anything like it. Nobody said a word, and somewhere in the silence of that extraordinary moment, without either of them knowing it yet, something that had been sealed shut for 6 years cracked open for the very first time. He walked straight to her. No hesitation, no performance, no carefully constructed entrance designed to remind everyone watching exactly who was crossing that room. Just Baek Taeyong, moving through 500 of South Korea's most powerful people, as though every single one of them was furniture and she was the only thing in the room worth moving toward. She was still looking at Seoul through the glass. He stood beside her for 3 full seconds before she acknowledged him. 3 seconds in which the most powerful man in that ballroom waited in complete silence for a 22-year-old student from Lagos to decide she was ready to look at him. And those 3 seconds were the 3 most extraordinary seconds he had witnessed in 9 years of service. Then she turned. Warm, direct, completely unafraid. Mr. Baek, she said. You made the journey. You gave me directions, he said. Something moved behind her eyes. Something warmer than amusement and more intelligent than flattery. Baek Taeyong, he said. Amanda Obi, she replied. It is very nice to meet you. She looked at him the way she had looked at Do-won, directly, genuinely, without the careful performance of someone managing a powerful person's ego. She simply looked at him, like he was a person, like that was the most natural thing in the world. It was the most disorienting experience of his adult life. You sent back my invitation, he said. I improved it, she replied pleasantly. No one has ever done that. She tilted her head. I imagine not, she said. That must get quite lonely. The words landed somewhere so precisely accurate that Taeyong had no immediate response. In 30 years of living, in boardrooms and backrooms and negotiations that determined the fates of companies and occasionally people, Baek Taeyong had never once been made temporarily speechless by a single sentence. He was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then, with a quality in his voice that Do-won had genuinely never heard before, would you like to get away from the noise for a few minutes? Amanda considered him. Not quickly, not nervously, with the unhurried, clear-eyed consideration of a woman who always thought before she moved and never moved before she thought. 5 minutes, she said. What was supposed to be 5 minutes became 40. Because something happened in that conversation that bypassed all the usual social performances and landed somewhere real. She did not ask about his empire. did not ask about his power or his influence or the invisible authority that had made every other person in that ballroom recalibrate when he entered it. She asked what Sol looked like when he was a child. She asked whether he cooked for himself. When he admitted he had not in years, she laughed. The full, unguarded laugh that had first reached him across the ballroom, and said her mother would be personally horrified on his behalf. He told her about his father's watch. He had not said that out loud to anyone. It came out of him in that ballroom corner 40 minutes into knowing her existence, and something loosened in his chest the moment it was spoken. Something that had been pulled tight for so long he had genuinely forgotten what loose felt like. When Professor Lim appeared to signal they were leaving, Amanda turned to Taeyong with that steady gaze. "It was genuinely lovely to meet you, Mr. Beck." She turned to leave, and something in Taeyong's chest moved with an urgency that went through every firewall he had built like they were made of paper. "The garden," he said. The word came before the decision did. 5 more minutes. Just the garden. Amanda stopped, did not turn immediately. 2 seconds of complete stillness. Then she looked back over her shoulder. 5 minutes, she said. Now pay attention. Because this is the moment the story has been building toward since the very first word. This is the moment that was shown at the beginning. The fountain, the trembling hands, the 3 words that stopped the night completely. Everything that was shown in those opening seconds, every question that was opened, every loop that was left hanging, is about to be answered right now. But knowing what happens and understanding why it happens are 2 completely different things. And it is only now, after everything, that the why finally makes complete sense. The hotel garden at midnight was the kind of place that made Sol's relentless energy feel like something happening in another world entirely. Stone pathways, sculpted hedges casting long soft shadows. The fountain at the center throwing moving light across everything it touched. The city's skyline visible above the garden walls. Close enough to remind you it existed, distant enough to feel like another life. Amanda sat on the stone bench beside the fountain. Shoes placed neatly to her left, feet tucked beneath her. She tipped her face up toward the October sky with the quiet, complete contentment of someone who found beauty in ordinary moments and never once felt the need to perform that finding for anyone watching. Taeyong stood at the garden entrance. He had dismissed Dowon, dismissed all of them. He was standing alone in an open space for the first time in longer than he could clearly remember. No men, no perimeter, no carefully managed distance between himself and a world that had once reached through his defenses and devastated everything it touched. He stood at the entrance and looked at this woman, sitting barefoot beside a fountain in the middle of his city as though she had always belonged there, and felt something moving through him that had no name because he had spent 6 years making sure he would never need a name for it. The terror of it was enormous. He sat beside her anyway. Neither spoke for almost 2 full minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. The specific quality of silence that only exists between 2 people who are both paying complete, genuine, undivided attention to the same moment. The fountain hummed. Sol glittered. October air moved softly between them. Sol is beautiful at night, Amanda said, not to fill the silence. Simply because it was true. I stopped seeing it, he said. She turned and looked at him. That happens, she said quietly. When you stop looking. They talked for 2 hours. He told her things he had not said aloud in years. The memory of his mother teaching him to make doenjang jjigae when he was 7. Her hands over his hands on a wooden spoon. The kitchen steamed and warm and completely safe. He had not thought about that memory in years. It arrived on his tongue fully formed as though it had been waiting for exactly this conversation to be spoken. She told him about her grandmother's bracelet. About arriving in Seoul and being simultaneously overwhelmed and in love with the city within 48 hours. About her mother calling every Sunday morning without exception and how missing even one call felt like losing gravity. You love her very much, he said. She is the reason I know how to be, Amanda said simply. Something shifted in the space between them. He looked at her. Really looked the way he had not allowed himself to look at anyone in 6 years, and felt it happening in real time. The thing Elder Choi had built the rule to prevent. The thing Suyin's betrayal had made him certain he would never survive a second time. The thing his mother had promised was not gone but only waiting. It was not waiting anymore. It was here, right now, in this garden, with this woman, happening whether he was ready or not. He was terrified. He reached out and took both her hands. She stilled completely, looked down at his hands holding hers. Then slowly, with those direct, warm, completely unfrightened eyes, up at his face. And she saw it. Whatever was living in his eyes at that specific moment. Not power, not strategy, not the carefully managed blankness he had worn for 6 years. Something raw and trembling and achingly, devastatingly human. Something that had been locked in a dark room since he was 23 years old and was now pressing both hands against the door with everything it had. His hands. These hands that had built an empire from nothing. That had signed agreements shaping the financial infrastructure of an entire city. That had never, not once in 30 years of living through things that should have broken him, trembled. Were trembling. "Marry me tonight," he said. Not commanded. Not performed. Not the voice of the most feared man in South Korea. The voice of a man who had been alone inside himself for 6 years and had just, in a hotel garden at midnight beside a fountain, run completely out of reasons to stay that way. The fountain hummed. Seoul glittered beyond the walls. The October air held everything still. And Amanda Obi, barefoot, unhurried, completely herself, looked at Baek Tae-yong for a long, full, unrushed moment. She did not say yes. She did not say no. She looked at him, at his trembling hands, at the raw, unguarded thing living in his eyes, and she said something that went through Baek Tae-yong like a blade made entirely of truth. "You don't want a wife tonight, Tae-yong," she said softly, not cruelly, not with judgment, with the specific, careful gentleness of someone who sees a wounded thing clearly and refuses to pretend otherwise. "You want someone to make you feel safe, and I understand that more than you know." He said nothing. His hands were still holding hers. "I will not say yes tonight," she continued, "but I will say this: I see something in you, something real, something underneath everything you have spent years building on top of it. And whatever that thing is, it is worth knowing." She squeezed his hands once, gently, finally. "Come find me when you are ready to be patient." She released his hands, picked up her shoes from the stone beside her, and walked back through the garden toward the light, unhurried, barefoot, completely herself, without looking back once. Baek Tae-yong stood alone beside the fountain for a very long time. The city glittered beyond the walls. The fountain hummed. October air moved through the garden carrying the last of the late roses. And the most feared man in South Korea stood in the middle of all that quiet beauty, feeling something he had not felt in 6 years. Something he had no clean category for because he had spent 6 years making sure he would never need one. He felt hope, and it terrified him more than anything that had ever threatened his empire. 3 days later, he appeared at the Yonsei University campus at 8:15 in the morning. No convoy, no Dowon, no carefully managed distance between himself and the world. Just Tae-yong in a dark coat standing near the entrance to the business faculty building, looking, for the first time that Kang Do-won had ever witnessed, like a man who was genuinely uncertain about something. Amanda came through the doors with a travel cup of coffee and her shoulder bag and that unhurried, grounded stride. She saw him, stopped, tilted her head in that particular way she had, the way that meant she was thinking before she spoke. "You found me," she said. "You said come find you," he replied. She studied him for a moment, looked at his hands, looked at his face, read something in both that she chose not to name out loud. "I did," she agreed. She held out her travel cup. "I only have one. You can have half." He looked at the cup. He took it. And that sharing a travel cup of coffee at 8:15 on a Tuesday morning outside a university building in Mapogu was the most intimate thing Baek Tae-yong had experienced in 6 years, which should have frightened him, which did frighten him, which he chose anyway. What followed was the most important and most painful education of his life. He pursued her with the focused intensity of a man who had made a decision. She welcomed his presence without surrendering a single piece of herself to accommodate it. The dynamic between them was unlike anything he had navigated before, and Tae-yong had navigated everything. Boardrooms, negotiations, confrontations that ordinary men did not survive. He had a precise, practiced response for every situation life had ever placed him in. Amanda Obi did not fit inside any of his practiced responses. She was warm without being available, present without being consuming, genuinely interested in him, in the real him, the underneath him, the him that existed before Suyin and Elder Choi and 6 years of iron discipline, in a way that should have felt invasive but somehow felt like the first breath after being underwater for a very long time. And she had boundaries, not walls. Taeyong knew walls. He had built the finest walls in South Korea. These were not walls. These were something quieter and far more formidable. These were the boundaries of a woman who knew precisely who she was and precisely what she deserved, and held both with such natural, unperformative certainty that attempting to cross them did not feel like hitting resistance. It felt like walking into clarity. The first time he canceled plans without explanation, retreating into the cold safety of distance when closeness felt too much like vulnerability. She sent him one message. "I hope you are okay. I am here when you are ready. No guilt, no punishment, no performance of hurt carefully designed to pull him back through obligation. Just a door left open and a light left on." He called within an hour. The second time he did it, she sent the same message. He called in 40 minutes. The third time he did not cancel. He sat with the discomfort of being close to someone and chose it over the familiar relief of distance. It was one of the hardest things he had done in years. Amanda noticed, said nothing about noticing, simply smiled at him across the restaurant table with a warmth that made him feel, for the first time in a very long time, like choosing closeness was not the same as choosing danger. But the walls did not come down easily. They never do. Not the walls built over 6 years of genuine pain. There were evenings he arrived cold, deployed the controlled, expressionless blankness on her that worked on absolutely everyone else in his life. The blankness that ended conversations and closed rooms and made people recalibrate their entire approach to him within 30 seconds. Amanda would look at him with those direct, unfrightened eyes and say quietly, "You don't have to do that with me. I am not her." The first time she said it, he left without responding. Drove home in complete silence. Sat in his empty penthouse and stared at the city for 2 hours and felt something move in his chest that he refused to name. The second time he said, very quietly, almost inaudibly, "I know." The third time he said, "I'm sorry." 2 words. 8 letters. The most vulnerable thing Baek Taeyong had said to another human being in 6 years. They came out rough and unpracticed, like something that had forgotten how to be spoken. And Amanda looked at him when he said them with an expression that was not triumph or satisfaction or relief. It was simply recognition, like she had always known those words were in there, like she had simply been waiting with patient, unshakable certainty for them to find their way out. His mother Baek Sujin met Amanda on a Sunday afternoon 6 weeks into everything. Taeyong brought her to his mother's home for lunch with the specific nervous energy of a man who understood, without being fully ready to admit it, that this introduction meant something he was not yet prepared to name out loud. He drove with his hands tight on the wheel and said almost nothing for the entire journey, and Amanda sat in the passenger seat looking out at Seoul's Sunday streets with complete, comfortable ease, and occasionally pointed out things she found beautiful. A street vendor arrangement, a child chasing pigeons, a row of persimmon trees going orange along a quiet road. He looked at everything she pointed at. He had not looked at his city like that in years. Sujin opened the door and took exactly 3 seconds to look at Amanda before her eyes moved to her son. And in those 3 seconds she read everything. She saw how he was standing, the particular quality of his stillness. Different from his usual stillness, warmer somehow, more alive at the edges. She saw the way he positioned himself slightly toward Amanda without appearing to realize he was doing it. She saw what was living in his eyes that she had not seen since he was 22 years old. She smiled at Amanda with her entire face. "Come in," she said warmly. "I made far too much food. I always make too much when it matters." Lunch lasted 3 hours. Amanda helped clear dishes without being asked. She asked Sujin about the garden with genuine curiosity and listened to the answers with genuine interest. She heard stories about Taeyang's childhood, the Dunjang Jigi, a particular disaster involving a school performance at age 9, the way he used to fall asleep on the sofa with his father's newspaper over his face, and she teased him about each one so naturally, so warmly, that Sujin laughed until tears came to her eyes. And Taeyong, the man who had not been teased by anyone in 6 years because everyone around him was too careful or too frightened, sat at his mother's table, and took every single moment of it with something on his face that it took Sujin several minutes to identify, because she had not seen it in so long. He looked genuinely, quietly, unexpectedly happy. When Amanda stepped into the garden to call her mother, Sujin stood beside her son in the kitchen and spoke quietly and directly the way only mothers who have earned the right speak. "She sees you," she said. "Not the empire, not the power, not the walls. She sees you, Taeyong. The real you. The you I have been praying someone would find." He watched Amanda through the kitchen window. She was laughing at something her mother said. The full, unguarded laugh that he had first heard across a ballroom and that had somehow known exactly where to land in his chest. Her grandmother's bracelet caught the afternoon light. "I know, Iyama," he said quietly. "Then don't ruin it," she said simply. "By being afraid." He turned and looked at his mother. "I'm trying," he said. She looked back at him with 30 years of loving difficult men and surviving impossible circumstances in her eyes. "Try harder," she said. Month 4 brought the night that nearly broke everything. It arrived without warning, the way the hardest nights always do. Not announced, not prepared for, just suddenly, completely there. Taeyong had spent the day in a meeting that excavated things he kept buried under the Empire's constant, relentless demands. A business rival had discovered something. Not about Amanda, not yet, but close enough. Close enough that Elder Choi had appeared at his office door in the late afternoon with those ancient, calculating eyes carrying a warning that landed in Taeyong's chest like something cold and heavy. "Attachments," Elder Choi said quietly, "are being noticed. Noticed attachments become targeted attachments. You remember what happened the last time." He remembered. He remembered every single second of what happened the last time. He arrived at Amanda's apartment that evening carrying 6 years of fear wearing the face of coldness. He sat across from her at her small kitchen table and he was distant, closed, sealed in the specific way that he had perfected over years of practice. He said things designed to create space. Not because he wanted space, because space felt survivable and closeness felt like standing at the edge of something he had already fallen off once and barely survived. Amanda let him finish. She did not interrupt, did not flinch, did not perform hurt in the way that might have pulled him back through guilt. She simply waited until he was done. Then she folded her hands on the table, looked at him with those direct, clear, completely unfrightened eyes, and spoke with the quiet precision of someone who had thought carefully about every single word before she said it. "I need you to hear me, Taeyong. Really hear me." He looked at her. "I am not Suyin," she said. "I will never be Suyin. What she did to you was a cruelty that you did not deserve. It was calculated and it was patient and it was devastating and I am genuinely sorry it happened to you." Something moved across his face, gone before it fully arrived. "But I will not pay for her choices," Amanda continued. "I will not shrink myself or apologize for being real or pretend not to see you clearly just because being seen clearly once nearly destroyed you. That is not love. That is just a different kind of loneliness." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, Seoul moved through its evening with complete indifference to what was happening inside this small apartment in Mapogu. "You are allowed to be loved, Taeyong," she said, and her voice on those words was so steady, so certain, so completely without performance that it went through every wall he had built like they had always been made of something temporary. "You were never forbidden. You were only broken. And broken and forbidden are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing." The silence that followed was the longest of Taeyong's adult life. He sat with those words in the specific way that a person sits with something true that they have been running from, not comfortably, not easily, but with the particular stillness of someone who has finally stopped running and is standing in the open for the first time in years. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, lower, stripped of everything he usually wore on top of it. "I don't know how to do this without being terrified," he said. Amanda looked at him across the small table in her small apartment in her small life that was more genuinely full than anything he had built in his enormous one. "I know," she said simply. "Do it terrified. I will be right here." And then Baek Taeyong, the man whose name meant son, the man that governments feared, the man who had not shown a single person his real face in 6 years, did something that he had not done since the night Suyin disappeared. He let someone see him cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, completely, without any of the armor he had worn for so long it had started to feel like skin. And Amanda did not make it into something. Did not reach across the table to manage it or console it or turn it into a moment about her response to his vulnerability. She simply stayed, present and steady and real, exactly as she had promised. It was the most important night of his life. But it was not the last hard one, because Elder Choi was not finished. 2 weeks after the kitchen table night, Elder Choi arrived at Taeyang's office with something more specific than a warning. He had discovered Amanda's name, her university, her apartment in Mapogu. He laid the information on Taeyang's desk with the calm efficiency of a man delivering a business report. "She is exposed," he said simply. "Which means you are exposed. The Hanjin faction has been watching your movements for 3 months. If they identify her as a vulnerability..." "Enough," Taeyang said. His voice was very quiet. The kind of quiet that, in Taeyang's specific register, meant something that nobody in that office wanted it to mean. Elder Choi looked at him. "This is exactly what happened with..." "I said enough." The room went completely still. Elder Choi studied his employer for a long moment. Studied the set of his jaw. The particular quality of his stillness. The thing living in his eyes that was not anger and not fear but something else. Something that Elder Choi had spent 5 years successfully preventing and was now looking at fully formed across a mahogany desk. He left without another word. Taeyang sat alone in his office for a long time after the door closed. Then he called Do-won. "I need a security arrangement," he said. "Discreet. Permanent. Around a specific address in Mapogu. She does not know about it. She will not know about it. Nothing touches her." "Understood," Do-won said. And Do-won, "Sir, if anything comes near her, you call me first. Before anything else. You call me first." A pause. "Understood," Do-won said again. And in his voice, beneath the professional precision, was something that sounded almost like relief. Like a man who had waited 9 years to hear his employer say something exactly like that. Amanda never knew about the security arrangement. She knew something had shifted in Taeyang after that night at her kitchen table. Not that the difficulty was over. It was not over. It would not be over for months. And there were still evenings he retreated and mornings he arrived with his walls freshly reinforced as though the night had rebuilt what the day had dismantled. But something fundamental had changed. He was choosing differently. Imperfectly, inconsistently, with visible effort and occasional spectacular failure, but choosing. He started cooking. Small things at first. Badly. Amanda received a message one Thursday evening that said only, "Dunjang Jigi. It is terrible. Come anyway." She arrived at his penthouse to find him standing in his kitchen in a white shirt with his sleeves rolled up looking at a pot with the focused, slightly offended expression of a man who has been defeated by a recipe and refuses to fully accept it. She walked in, looked at the pot, looked at him. "It smells right," she said generously. "It tastes wrong," he said. "Move," she said. She stood beside him at his stove in his penthouse kitchen overlooking Seoul's nightscape and fixed his Dunjang Jigi with the easy competence of someone who had learned cooking as a language rather than a skill. And Taeyang stood close beside her and watched her hands and felt something so quiet and so enormous moving through him that he had to look away before she saw it on his face. His mother called the following Sunday. "Do-won tells me you cooked," she said. "Do-won talks too much," he replied. Sujin laughed. The deep, satisfied, full-hearted laugh of a woman whose prayers were being answered in real time. Month 6, Month 7, Month 8. Each one brought its own specific difficulty and its own specific breakthrough. Each one brought Taeyang slightly further from the man who had sat in a dark room and agreed to a rule written in fear, and slightly closer to the man his mother had always known was in there underneath everything that had been built on top of him. Amanda never pushed, never demanded, never made him feel ashamed of how slow the dismantling was. She simply held her own ground with one hand and held space for his becoming with the other, and she did both with a grace that continued to astonish him every single time. One evening, Month 7, a quiet Tuesday, rain against the penthouse windows. He looked at her across his living room while she was reading and not paying attention to him at all, and felt it so completely and so clearly that there was simply no point pretending anymore. He loved her, not the ghost of love, not the frightened outline of it, not the distant, muffled version that lived behind walls and called itself something safer. He loved her the way he had forgotten people could love, with his whole self, with nothing withheld, with a completeness that should have terrified him and instead felt like the first solid ground he had stood on in 6 years. He said nothing that evening, but the decision that had been forming in him for months became quietly, completely, permanently made. He went to see Elder Choi on a Monday morning in April. Not summoned, not scheduled. Taeyong arrived at the old man's office the way he arrived everywhere. Quietly, completely, without announcing himself until he was already there. Elder Choi looked up from his desk and read something in Taeyong's face immediately. Something that made him set down his pen with the careful deliberateness of a man preparing for a conversation he had been postponing in his mind for months. "You have made a decision," Elder Choi said. "I ended the rule," Taeyong said. "Not I am ending it. Not I am thinking about ending it. Past tense. Already done. Already finished." The way Taeyong made every decision that mattered. Completely, irreversibly, without leaving himself a door to retreat through. Elder Choi was quiet for a long moment. "She will make you vulnerable," he said. The same words he had used before. The same warning delivered in the same careful, measured tone. "She already has," Taeyong said. "And I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Your father." "My father," Taeyong said quietly, "did not die because he loved my mother. He died because someone weaponized that love. Those are not the same thing. I spent 6 years believing they were the same thing. They are not." Elder Choi looked at him for a long, assessing moment. Those ancient eyes reading the specific quality of Taeyong's stillness the way they had read it for years, looking for uncertainty, for performance, for the particular kind of conviction that was actually just stubbornness wearing a different coat. He found none of those things. What he found instead was something he had not seen in Baek Taeyong since before Suyin, since before the rule, since before 6 years of carefully constructed emptiness. He found a man who was whole. Elder Choi picked up his pen. "Then go," he said simply, "and do not waste it." Taeyong drove to his mother's house. Sujin was in her garden when he arrived, tending to the persimmon tree that she had planted the year his father died and that had grown, stubbornly and beautifully, into something that now shaded the entire south side of the house. She heard him come through the gate and turned and looked at his face. She dropped her gardening gloves. Both hands came up to cover her mouth, because she could see it. Everything. All of it. Written across her son's face with a clarity and an openness that she had not seen since he was 22 years old and the world had not yet taught him that openness was a liability. He crossed the garden, sat across from her at the small outdoor table where they had shared 10,000 cups of tea, looked at his mother, this woman who had loved him through everything, who had held hope for him when he had none for himself, who had prayed every morning for the person who would reach him, and said 3 words so simply that their simplicity was the most powerful thing about them. "I found her." Baek Sujin made a sound that was not quite a word. Her eyes filled immediately, not with sadness, not with relief alone, but with the specific, enormous emotion of a prayer answered so completely that the answer was almost too large to hold. She reached across the table, took his face in both hands, the way she had when he was a small boy and she wanted him to hear something important. "There he is," she whispered. "There is my son." He covered her hands with his. They sat in the garden for a long time. The persimmon tree moved quietly above them. Seoul went about its business beyond the walls. And between a mother and her son something was completed that had been left unfinished for 6 devastating years. Before he left she pressed something into his hand. A ring. Simple. Precise. A single diamond set in a band of Korean gold. The specific warm tone of it that is slightly different from any other gold in the world. She had been holding it for 3 months. Waiting. Certain. "I chose it," she said. "I hope that is all right." He looked at the ring in his palm, closed his fingers around it. "It is perfect," he said. He proposed to Amanda on a Thursday evening in October. 1 year exactly from the night they met. He brought her back to the Latte Hotel. Not for an event, not for dinner, not with any explanation that prepared her for what was coming. "Just come with me tonight. There is somewhere I want to take you." She came. They walked through the hotel and out through the corridor and into the garden, and Amanda stopped when she saw it. The same fountain, the same stone paths, October air carrying the same faint perfume of late roses. Soul glittering beyond the walls in the exact same way it had glittered 1 year ago when two people sat beside this fountain and had a conversation that changed the direction of both their lives. She turned to look at him. She turned and found him already on one knee. The fountain hummed behind him. Soul glittered beyond the garden walls. October air moved softly through the sculpted hedges carrying the last perfume of late roses. And Baek Taeyong, the man whose name meant son, the man that governments feared, the man who had looked through every woman who ever stood before him as though they were made of glass, was on one knee on cold stone in a hotel garden holding a ring that his mother had chosen 3 months ago because she knew before he did. Amanda's hands came up and covered her mouth. "I spent 6 years believing I was forbidden to love," he said. His voice, that voice that had commanded rooms and ended negotiations and never once wavered in 30 years of living, was doing something it had never done before. It was breaking, slightly, cleanly, at the edges. I was not forbidden. I was broken. And you, Amanda Obi, you did not fix me. You did something more important than that. You stood beside me while I learned to fix myself. She was crying. She had not decided to cry. It was simply happening. I asked you to marry me once before, he continued. Right here, at this fountain, 1 year ago tonight. And you said no. And you were right to say no. I was not ready. He paused, drew one slow breath. I am ready now. I am completely, terrifyingly, entirely ready. Will you marry me? Amanda stepped forward. She took his face in both hands, her warm dark hands against his pale face, and looked into his eyes from close distance and saw everything she had been waiting to see since the night he first crossed a ballroom for her. No walls, no armor, no distance, just him. Completely, irreversibly, beautifully him. Yes, she said. Baek Taeyong. Yes. He slid the ring onto her finger beside her grandmother's gold bracelet. Then he stood and pulled her close, not desperately, not dramatically, with the completeness of a man holding something he stopped believing he deserved and is only now allowing himself to feel the full weight of. She pressed her face into his chest. He pressed his face into her braids. The fountain hummed. Soul glittered. And for a long, still, perfect moment, nothing in the world moved. She called her mother that night from the hotel garden, still wearing the ring. Grace Obi answered on the second ring. Amanda held up her hand toward the phone camera without saying a single word. The sound Grace made, that specific Nigerian mother sound that exists somewhere between a scream and a sob and a praise and a prayer all at once, traveled from Lagos across 11,000 kilometers of ocean and landed in that Seoul hotel garden and made Taeyong, standing 3 feet away, smile. Actually smile. The full, unguarded, completely real smile that his face had forgotten how to make for 6 years. He called his mother the following morning. Sujin answered and heard one sentence. Yama, I am going to marry her. She did not speak for 17 seconds. When she finally did, her voice was the voice of a woman whose most important prayer had just been answered so completely she barely had language for it. I know, she whispered. I have known since the Sunday she fixed your Dunjang Jigi. He laughed, and the sound of it, Baek Taeyong laughing freely, completely, without strategy or performance, made Sujin press her hand over her heart and close her eyes and breathe. But the world that Taeyong had built over 6 years of blood and silence and iron discipline did not simply step aside because he found love. Came for them. 3 weeks after the proposal, Elder Choi walked into Taeyong's office and placed a single photograph on his desk. Taeyong looked at it, his jaw set. The photograph showed Amanda leaving her university building. It had been taken from a distance, professionally, by people who were not his men. The Hanjin faction, Elder Choi said quietly. They have identified her. They know what she means to you. They are going to use her. The silence in the office was enormous. You have 2 choices, Elder Choi continued. You end it with the girl, completely and publicly. Make them believe she means nothing. Or, he paused, you dismantle the empire. All of it. You remove yourself from this world entirely. No half measures. If you stay in this life, she will never be safe. Not for a single day. Taeyong looked at the photograph for a very long time. That evening he drove to Amanda's apartment. He sat across her small kitchen table, the same table where she had once told him he was not forbidden, only broken, and he told her everything. Every part of his world that he had kept carefully separate from her. The real weight of it. The real danger of it. The real cost of loving him. Amanda listened without interrupting. When he finished, the apartment was very quiet. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He reached across the table, took her hands. "I am going to choose you," he said. "I am going to choose you completely. But I need you to understand what that means. I am going to walk away from everything. The empire, the power, all of it. And I need to know that you understand that the man you are marrying after that will just be a man. No empire, no power, just me." Amanda looked at him for a long moment. "Taeyong," she said softly, "that is the only version of you I ever wanted." He transferred the empire to his most trusted cousin within 30 days. Not dramatically, not with a grand gesture. Simply, efficiently, completely, permanently. Elder Choi watched it happen with the expression of a man watching something he spent 6 years building being quietly folded and set aside. He said nothing, because somewhere beneath the iron discipline and the ancient calculating eyes, he understood. Grace Obi arrived from Lagos 3 days early and immediately took over Sujin's kitchen. The two women, one Nigerian, one Korean, stood side by side at the same stove speaking different languages and understanding each other completely through the universal language of feeding people they loved. By the second morning, they were sharing recipes. By the third morning, they were finishing each other's sentences through gesture alone. The wedding happened on a Saturday in March. Small, 30 people. The room glowing with candlelight and the specific warmth of people who genuinely loved the two people at the center of it. Amanda walked down the aisle in a dress that was quietly, perfectly, heartbreakingly beautiful. Taeyong stood at the end of it and stopped breathing for 2 full seconds when he saw her. When the officiant asked Taeyong if he took Amanda as his wife, he said, "I do." Quietly, directly, looking only at her face, like it was the most private thing he had ever said in public. 2 months later, they landed at JFK Airport in New York City with 4 suitcases and the specific terrifying, exhilarating energy of two people starting completely over in a country that did not know either of their names. America received them the way America receives people who arrive with nothing to prove, with overwhelming noise and brilliant possibility and the specific freedom of anonymity. They found an apartment in Atlanta, Georgia. Warm, spacious, full of light. The specific opposite of the cold penthouse Taeyong had left behind in Seoul. Amanda hung her Nigerian fabric on the living room wall the first evening. Taeyong watched her do it and felt something in his chest that he now recognized immediately. Home. They did everything. Everything ordinary people do that Taeyong had spent 6 years being too powerful and too dangerous and too sealed to experience. They drove to the grocery store on Sunday mornings and he pushed the cart with the focused intensity of a man conducting a military operation while Amanda put things in it that were not on any list. They went to a 4th of July celebration in Piedmont Park and he watched American fireworks explode over Atlanta with an expression of genuine wonder that Amanda photographed secretly and kept forever. They went to a diner on a Tuesday morning and he tried his first stack of American pancakes with maple syrup and said with complete seriousness, "This is better than anything I have eaten in my life." And she laughed so hard she cried into her coffee. They went to Thanksgiving at a colleague of Amanda's. He sat at a table of 12 Americans who had absolutely no idea who he used to be and talked about football with a man named Deshaun for 2 hours and drove home afterwards saying, "I do not understand the rules, but I enjoyed myself," which made Amanda laugh the whole way home. They built something real, something ordinary. Something that required no bodyguards and no convoys and no carefully managed distance between themselves and the world. Something that was simply life. 5 years later, Amanda woke up on a Tuesday morning, looked at a small white test in a gas station bathroom during a road trip to Savannah, and walked back to the car where Taeyong was leaning against the hood scrolling through his phone. She held up the test without saying a word. He looked at it, looked at her. His phone dropped into the passenger seat behind him. Both his hands came up and covered his mouth, the same gesture she had made in a hotel garden when he proposed, and his eyes filled with something that had no name but required no name. He crossed to her in 2 steps and held her so completely that she laughed into his shoulder. "A baby," he said into her hair, like he needed to hear himself say it. A baby, she confirmed. He took care of her the way he did everything. Completely, precisely, with the focused intensity of a man for whom the person in front of him was the most important assignment he had ever been given. He drove her to every appointment. He learned everything, every stage, every week, every what to expect, and asked the doctors questions that made them look at him with impressed surprise. He woke up at 3 in the morning when she could not sleep and sat with her in the kitchen and made warm soup and did not once complain. He drove to 4 different stores on a Wednesday night to find the specific brand of Nigerian chin-chin crackers that she suddenly needed with an urgency that could not be negotiated with. He talked to her stomach, in Korean, in the specific warm, quiet voice that only Amanda had ever heard from him, the voice that existed underneath everything he had spent years building on top of it. She recorded it once without telling him. She watched it back every single day of her pregnancy. Their daughter arrived on a Thursday morning in November at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital. 7 pounds 2 ounces, the most perfect thing either of them had ever seen, with her mother's wide dark eyes and her father's sharp cheekbones and both their stubbornness already present and fully operational. Taeyong held her for the first time standing beside Amanda's hospital bed. This man who had once commanded the most feared underground empire in East Asia, holding a 7-pound baby girl in his arms with his hands shaking and his face completely destroyed by love in the most beautiful possible way. "She is so small," he said. "She is perfect," Amanda said. "She is both," he said, and the way he said it, quietly, with complete certainty, looking down at his daughter, made Amanda close her eyes and breathe and feel the specific enormous piece of a woman who chose correctly. They named her Suji Amara Beck. 1 year later, Grace flew from Lagos and Sujin flew from Seoul, and both grandmothers arrived at the Atlanta apartment within 6 hours of each other on a Saturday in November, the baby's first birthday. The apartment was loud and warm and full of the specific beautiful chaos of 2 grandmothers who loved the same child from 2 different worlds. Grace arrived with jollof rice and fried plantain and a head wrap for the baby that made everyone laugh. Sujin arrived with japchae and songpyeon and a tiny embroidered Korean pouch that made everyone cry. They sat on either side of the birthday baby, one grandmother on the left, one grandmother on the right, Suji Amara Beck between them, looking at both their faces with the calm, interested expression of a 1-year-old who had already decided she owned every room she entered. Grace looked across the baby at Sujin. Sujin looked across the baby at Grace. And without a single shared language between them, both women smiled the same smile. The smile of 2 mothers who each raised someone worth loving and watched that love build something that neither country, neither language, neither world could contain. Taeyong stood in the kitchen doorway watching his daughter between her 2 grandmothers and felt Amanda come to stand beside him. She slipped her hand into his. He looked down at her. "Are you happy?" she asked. He looked at his daughter, at his mother, at Grace, at the apartment full of warmth and noise and the beautiful ordinary chaos of a family that was never supposed to exist. Then he looked at Amanda. "I spent 6 years being the most powerful man in South Korea," he said quietly, "and I have never, not once, been as powerful as I feel right now." Amanda looked up at him. "That is because this," she said, gesturing at all of it, the baby, the grandmothers, the jollof rice and the japchae and the tiny embroidered Korean pouch and the head wrap and the birthday chaos and all of it, "is the only kind of power that actually means anything." He pulled her close. She leaned into him. Suji Amara Beck laughed at something her grandmother Grace was doing with her hands. A full, unguarded, completely delighted baby laugh that filled the entire apartment and landed in every corner of it. And Beck Taeyong, the man whose name meant son, stood in the warm light of everything love had built and finally, completely, permanently, rose. And that is what real love does. It does not find perfect people. It does not find easy people. It finds the broken ones, the sealed ones, the ones who stopped believing. And it stays patiently, stubbornly, completely until they remember how to rise. That is the lesson. That is the story. And if this story reached something in you today, if it reminded you that real love exists, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. If you have not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. These stories take everything. Every single word is written to make you feel something real. If this story moved you, if it reached something in you, let us know in the comments below. We read every single one. like this video and share it. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that real love exists. Share it with someone who has been broken by the wrong person and stopped believing the right one was coming. Because this story was for them. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for watching all the way to the end. That means everything. I will see you in the next story. Black Heart Ring.